Well, long-time foreign correspondent and current RT contributor Martin Jay joins us live now on the programme. Martin, I was looking forward to getting you on because I've been getting a lot of reaction from the countries themselves. I wanted to step back and get just an outside perspective of this. When you saw this developing overnight, the scale of it, an attack on Iran, this isn't Hezbollah, this isn't Hamas, this is a major nation. What was your initial reaction to the size of it?
I think my initial reaction was I didn't focus so heavily on the military campaign itself and the strikes and the collateral damage. What I thought immediately was this is Israel extending itself, not only in the region, but also with the Trump administration. And this is Netanyahu at a last-ditch position politically to really go full out on, on no holds bar regional war, with the sole objective of destroying the Iranian talks. I mean, that's really what this has done. You know, the talks that were, according to Donald Trump, which were going not too badly, they were at least moving in the right direction. There was a meeting penciled in for Sunday in Muscat. That's over now. That's blown out of the water, and I think that's a bigger victory for the Israelis than anything else. On a collateral level, on a military level, we don't know what exactly they've taken out because we can't trust the Israelis to tell us the truth on any intelligence they may well cultivate. So we need to wait for the Iranians to actually paint us a picture on the realities on the ground. But I think Netanyahu has overstretched himself. I think it's also a preemptive strike for him to the Trump administration to say, you know, a lot of people have argued in recent years, you know, that American foreign policy is run by the Israelis. I think what happened tonight really underlines that.
Do you think Israel would have carried out such an extensive attack on Iran if other nations in the region, I'm thinking of Saudi, Qatar, other countries, they're not overly put out by it. Can we put it that way? They're not historically friends with Tehran, and they see what's happening now as something that Israel's going to do in any case. Do you think this is going to lead to even bigger rifts right now in the Middle East?
Definitely. I think there's no question about that. You know, the point that your previous commentator, mate Stephen, said in Syria, I don't agree with. I think his opinion reflects a typical overzealous and rather delusional view of the West about how weak Iran is. Iran isn't quite so weak as he points out. Iran has Russia. Iran has China. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that. You know, so those countries are not going to let Iran just fall into the abyss militarily, geopolitically, or otherwise. And this idea that Iran is on the back foot is true. It has lost Assad, and it has lost Hezbollah to some extent in Lebanon. It doesn't quite have the clout that it had regionally. However, you know, the ballistic missiles program has not been knocked out. I think Stephen is right to say this was an intelligence failure. Definitely that would be the first priority of the Iranians today, to look at the gaps in its intelligence. If you look at what happened in October of last year, the Israelis tried to penetrate with their aircraft, airstrike within Iran, and failed. The jets couldn't get into the airspace because the technology detected that they would be intercepted, so they didn't penetrate it. I wonder, Ewan, whether that was also the case last night, because if you look at the strikes on a map of Iran, they're all mainly in the west of the country, within easy reach of Iraq. So it could be looking at temporary missile sites set up in Iraq to have done the job. You know, but to answer your question, I think the Iranians are running out of patience now with this so-called neutral stance of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Emirates. You know, I think the gloves will be off in the coming days and weeks, and I think they may well be soft targets. You know, top commentators like Saeed Mirandi, who you have on the show, have actually even tweeted that in the last hour, that they can be expected to be hit.
You know, when I'm just trying to figure out where this fits in terms of relations between the US and Israel, because we've had Donald Trump coming out and saying, you know, a deal might not be there in terms of a nuclear pact, but we're edging closer. Yet we have Netanyahu doing this, and now all of a sudden those talks, those discussions look to be in the bin. Does Netanyahu, does he care what Donald Trump tells him anymore? Because he knows the so-called deep state, the State Department, the people really who run foreign ops, intelligence in the US, that's the ones Netanyahu really needs on his side. So does he care?
He doesn't, but he's got to think about public relations. He's got to think about international relations. So it's within, I think it's to his advantage that he keeps relations as cordial as they possibly can be. And if you look at since when Trump came into office the second time round, there have certainly been some rough riots between these two characters, and there's been some rather quite raucous exchanges on social media, particularly from Trump. So it's
Martin, can I just interrupt right there because you set it up? Let's play the video of 2 weeks ago, what was said, and then we'll get your thoughts on it, just to give us our viewers a reminder of what exactly is being said to Netanyahu.
Did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. And I said, I don't think it's appropriate right now, because if we can settle it with a very strong document, very strong, with inspections and no trust, I don't trust anybody.
Yet this massive operation still happens.
Yeah. And, now I think not just the Americans and not just the Israelis, I think the Europeans now must be looking at this very carefully and very nervously, because if that relationship deteriorates, then with any other president, with any other US president, we could say that it wouldn't be so bad. But Trump is Trump. Trump is insecure. Trump is macho. Trump is, his entire raison d'etre is about presenting himself to the world as being incredibly powerful and being in the media all the time. And I wonder whether this was a wise move from Netanyahu to actually really take on Trump and defy Trump's ideas. Both, if you look at the policies of both men, they both have the same objective. They want to disarm Iran from having a nuclear weapon, but the way about going about that, they clash on quite strongly. And we'll see whether we'll see how things pan out in the following weeks. What's important to note here is that while Trump may be very resistant to go into a war with Israel on Iran's territory, it can't really get out of defending Israel. And Netanyahu knows that. He knows that there's going to be retaliation coming back. And he knows that the Americans and the British and a few other key allies will have to play a role within Israel to do that. But in the meantime, he's got a lot of political capital that he's won today. He's hit Iran very, very hardly. He's shown his own constituents and his own opposition party that he is a tougher leader that can rally the support when he's really pushed against the wall. And that that Israelis controlling U.S. foreign policy is no longer a myth. I think it's something that we will have to work with.
Something I think gets lost whenever Iran and the words Iran and nuclear come up, Martin, is that why shouldn't, as Tehran says itself, why shouldn't we have a nuclear program for energy? Many sovereign countries are pushing that. We want to look after our own needs. We don't want to be dependent on another nation for keeping our citizens warm, etc. It's a valid point, isn't it? Because whenever we hear about nuclear sites in Iran, we automatically think of weapons. But it's Israel, the country which attacked Iran, has de facto weapons, never admitted to it, but they're the ones who have them themselves. It's hard not to think of double standards at play here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, double standards and hypocrisy, to the maximum. And of course, when we look at Iran, we shouldn't forget that it's still a relatively poor country. But when you spend as much time in the Middle East as I have, I used to live in Lebanon, and you talk to foreign ministers and their entourages of Gulf countries, Gulf CC countries, they talk about Iran with a lot of jealousy, with a lot of envy, because Iran has the technology. We should never forget that. Iran is very advanced in these areas, so it's quite normal, and it's completely understandable that it would want to provide very, very cheap energy to so many people in such a huge country. The irony of this story, I mean, the real irony for me, and I'll probably write about it later today, is that we wouldn't be in this position if Trump hadn't behaved so stupidly in 2018 in his first term. by pulling America out of the so-called Iran deal. That took years to put together. It was Obama's baby. I followed it, I mean, quite extensively. And the deal that we had then wasn't great, but we wouldn't be in a position we're in now with the levels of uranium that Iran has and the breakout period of the Israelis claim it's about a year. Sometimes they say it's less. It could be 6 months, but it's certainly less now than it was in 2018. So essentially, it's basically Trump's fault. Trump's brought us to this position.
Very interesting. You're writing an op-ed on that?
I will do, probably today, yeah.
Okay, we'll keep an eye out for that. Just a final point, Martin. I speaking to other guests during the course of the day and hearing varying opinions on how long this particular this violence is going to spread. Is it going to get bigger? Is it going to last? What is your sense? Does it depend on the scale of Iran's reaction? And do they have to react strong because they've been left in no other position? Or is there a way out of this that they don't have to?
Well, the way out of it would have been diplomatically. But the problem is, put yourself in a position of the Iranians now. They're having emergency meetings, high level. You can imagine a lot of hardline leaders arguing to the liberal side, look, we trusted the Americans the first time round, and look what happened. Now the second time round, you still want us to trust the Americans? Imagine the cynicism, the skepticism of a lot of Iranian officials who will be saying today, look, can we really believe Trump? I mean, with these statements that he made, can we really believe that he wasn't part of these attacks? Just the day before, he made a statement again that he was hoping that the Israelis wouldn't go ahead with such attack because it would be detrimental to the peace process. The Iranians will be asking themselves, was all this a clever ruse? Is he really behind it? Because he has also made these statements earlier on. When the Iran talks started again, he made these very threatening statements which alluded to hitting Iran if the Iranians didn't play ball. So, the answer to your question is if diplomacy was there, but this is very much a failure of diplomacy now. And so the longer term realities of this is that Iran has to hit back. It doesn't have any other option now politically, otherwise it would be the end of this regime. It has to show that it's capable of hitting back. It has to show that it won't be, attacked by regional players, and in particular Israel. And now, the focus now will be on that retaliation within Israel and the extent of how far the Americans support them. We know from October last year that the Israelis are actually quite vulnerable to Iranian attacks. The Iranians, don't forget, not only have an amazing array of ballistic missiles, but they have hypersonic missiles as well, which travel at such a speed that most of Israel's defense systems just can't shoot them down. So I think they'll be looking at that now, how to hit Iranian military facilities almost immediately, I would say.
Yeah, really interesting point to end with. Top-notch analysis, as always. RT contributor Martin J. Martin, appreciate you coming on and speaking to us at length as well.